The thing I'm talking about is immaterial, untouchable. They couldn't, do anything about it at all. Kedy, will you please tell this big goofus that even though you have got Jarvis Hilton's brain, you aren't Jarvis Hilton and never can be?"
The atmosphere of the room vibrated in the frequencies of a deep bass laugh. "You are trying to hold a completely untenable position, friend Hilton. Any attempt to convince a mind of real power that falsity is truth is illogical. My advice is for you to surrender."
That word hit Temple hard. "Not surrender, sweetheart. I'm not fighting you. I never will." She seized both of his hands. Tears welled into her glorious eyes. "It's just that I simply couldn't stand it to go on living without you."
"I know, darling." He got up and lifted her to her feet, so that she could come properly into his arms. They stood there, silent and motionless, for minutes. Temple finally released herself and, after feeling for a handkerchief she did not have, wiped her eyes with a forefinger and then wiped the finger on her bare leg. She grinned and turned to the Omans. "Prince, will you and Dark Lady please conjure us up a steak and mushroom supper? They should be in the pantry, since this Sirius was designed for us." After supper the two sat companionably on a davenport. "One thing about this business isn't quite clear," Temple said. "Why all this tearing rush? They haven't got the booster or anything like it, or they'd have used it. Surely it'll take them a long time to go from the mere analysis of the forces and fields we use clear through to the production and installation of enough weapons to stop this whole fleet." "It surely won't. They've had the absorption principle for ages. Remember that first, ancient skeleton that drained all the power of our suits and boats in nothing flat? From there it isn't too big a jump. And as for producing stuff, if there's any limit to what they can do, I don't know what it is. If we don't slug 'em before they get it, it's curtains." "I see. I'm afraid. We're almost there, darling." He glanced at the chronometer. "About 11 minutes, and of course I don't need to ask you to stay out of the way." "Of course not. I won't interfere, no matter what happens. All I'm going to do is hold your hand and pull for you with all my might." "That'll help, believe me. I'm mighty glad you're along, sweetheart, even though both of us know you shouldn't be." The task force emerged. Each ship darted towards its preassigned place in a mathematically exact envelope around the planet Strett. Hilton sat on a davenport, strained and still. His eyes were closed and every muscle tense. Left hand gripped the armrest so furiously that fingertips were inches deep in the leather-covered padding.
The Stretts knew that any such attack as this was futile. No movable structure or any combination of such structures could possibly wield enough power to break down screens powered by such engines as theirs.
Hilton, however, knew that there was a chance. Not with the first stage boosters, which were manipulable and detonable masses of ball lightning, but with those boosters' culminations, the Vangs, which were ball lightning raised to the sixth power, and which only the frightful energies of the boosters could bring into being. But even with 20,000 plus Vangs, or any larger number, success depended entirely upon a nicety of timing never before approached and supposedly impossible. Not only to thousandths of a microsecond, but to a small fraction of 1/6000th, roughly, the time it takes light to travel 3/16 of an inch. It would take practically absolute simultaneity to overload to the point of burnout to those Strett generators. They were the heaviest in the galaxy. That was why Hilton himself had to be there. He could not possibly have done the job from Ardvor. In fact, there was no real assurance that, even at the immeasurable velocity of thought, and covering a mere 1,000,000 miles, he could do it even from his present position aboard one unit of the fleet. Theoretically, with his speed up, he could, but that theory had yet to be reduced to practice.
Tense and strained, Hilton began his countdown.
Temple sat beside him. Both hands pressed his right fist against her breast. Her eyes, too, were closed. She was as stiff and as still as was he. She was not interfering, but giving, supporting him, backing him, giving to him in full flood everything of that tremendous inner strength that had made Temple Bells what she so uniquely was. On the exact center of the needle-sharp zero beat, every Kedy struck, gripped and activated as they all were by Hilton's keyed up and stretched out mind. They struck in what was very close indeed to absolute unison. Absorbing beams, each one having had precisely the same number of millimeters to travel, reached the screen at the same instant. They clung and sucked. Immeasurable floods of energy flashed from the Stretch generators into those vortices to form 20,000 plus first stage boosters. But this time, the boosters did not detonate. Instead, as energies continued to flood in at a frightfully accelerating rate, they turned into something else. Things no Terran science has ever even imagined. Things at the formation of which all neighboring space actually warped, and in that warping seethed and writhed and shuddered. The very sub-ether screamed and shrieked in protest as it too yielded, in starkly impossible fashions, to that irresistible stress. How even those silicon fluorine brains stood it, not one of them ever knew. Microsecond by slow microsecond, the vangs grew and grew and grew. They were pulling not only the full power of the Ardan warships, but also the immeasurably greater power of the strainingly overloaded Stratian generators themselves. The ethereal and sub-ethereal writhings and distortions and screamings grew worse and worse, harder and ever harder to bear. Imagine, if you can, a constantly and rapidly increasing mass of plutonium. A mass already thousands of times greater than critical, but not allowed to react. That gives a faint and very inadequate picture of what was happening then. Finally, at perhaps 100,000 times critical mass, and still in perfect sync, the vangs all went off. The planet Strett became a nova. "We won! We won!" Temple shrieked, her perception piercing through the hellish murk that was all nearby space. "Not quite yet, sweet, but we're over the biggest hump." And the two held an impromptu but highly satisfactory celebration. Perhaps it would be better to say that the planet Strett became a junior grade nova, since the actual nova stage was purely superficial and did not last very long. In a couple of hours things had quieted down enough so that the heavily screened warships could approach the planet and finish up their part of the job. Much of Strett's land surface was molten lava. Much of its water was gone. There were some pockets of resistance left, of course, but they did not last long. Equally, of course, the Stretts themselves, 25 miles underground, had not been harmed at all. But that, too, was according to plan. Leaving the task force on guard to counter any move the Stretts might be able to make, Hilton shot the Sirius out to the planet's moon. There Sawtelle and his staff and tens of thousands of Omans and machines were starting to work. No part of this was Hilton's job, so all he and Temple did was look on. Correction, please. That is not all they did, but while resting and eating and loafing and sleeping and enjoying each other's company, Both watched Operation Moon closely enough to be